Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted a life filled with more happiness, health, and joy, then do we have the show for you. Today I'll be talking with Leonard Perlmutter, co-founder of the American Meditation Institute and the author of one of the deepest, most profound books I've ever read, The Heart and Science of Yoga. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about an empowering self-care program for a happy, healthy, joyful life. That plus we'll talk about Elvis's guru, Ed Sullivan and spinning plates, the importance of renouncing tea, what we can all learn from the Sadhu and the snake, the importance of driving in the slow lane, the gift of Saratoga, and what on earth the world's whitest horse has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Leonard. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Michael.
Thank you so much, and a mighty woohoo for joining me here today. So before we dive right into things, I've got to ask, how did you meet your wife, Janice?
Oh, that's a story. I was in my early to mid 20s. Mm-hmm. I was publishing an alternative newspaper in Albany, New York, and I was soliciting advertising from Sears. And I went to a Sears about 1 o'clock in the afternoon to the advertising department, and there was no receptionist in the front area, and so I started walking down a long corridor. And I would poke my head in each little cubicle, each office, looking for somebody. And I went all the way to the end of the corridor, and I didn't see anybody in any of the offices. But at the far end of the corridor, there was this woman seated in front of an easel. And I went up to her, and I said, "Is there nobody here?" And she looked at me with a quizzical look, and she said, "I'm here." And I responded by asking, "Well, do you have a philosophy of life?"
What a pickup line.
And we started a conversation, and we're still having it today. And this was my wife.
There's something incredibly spiritual about heading down a long corridor with nobody appearing and nobody appearing. That's so beautiful. That is a woo! So from there, if we go, I guess, forward in time from there, what was your occupation and hers, and at least until the early 90s?
When I first met Janice, I was a newspaper publisher and an editor. And starting in the mid-'70s, I became an art dealer. I had gone to school for international relations and international law, went to law school. Was very disenchanted with the practice of law. And that's when I started the newspaper business. And then when Janice and I were cementing our relationship, we enjoyed working together on the newspaper. She was my editorial illustrator. Mm-hmm. I hired her away from Sears, and and we started an art gallery, and we began selling her paintings, primarily in Saratoga Springs, where the thoroughbred racing is very popular. And for 21, 22 years, she painted pictures of thoroughbred racing.
Beautiful. And how long during this time, or maybe during this entire time and beyond, were you taking a deep dive into spirituality?
In earnest, of course, we've both been very philosophical in our orientation about all of life. But starting in the, I would say it was probably around 73, 74, our practice began to deepen, and we took it more and more seriously. And so by the mid-'70s, we were piecing together a philosophy of life and what we refer to as a sadhana, a spiritual practice.
Beautiful. And then how did you get interested in Swami Rama's books?
Janice was watching a television show by Lilias Folan. At the time, Lilias, who was known as the first woman of yoga, taught a weekly hatha yoga class on PBS at the time. She lived in Cincinnati, and she had this weekly show, and she would have guests on. And I believe that that day that she had Ram Dass on, and she asked Ram Dass, what Indian teachers are in the United States teaching today? And the one name that stood out was Swami Rama. And so we wrote him a letter. We got a list of reading materials. And I would say that both of us had a healthy allergy to gurus at that time. We had already started our own practice, and we read the books, and I felt a great affinity to the teaching. When I was a child, I was in Scouts. I was a Cub Scout, I was a Boy Scout, and gee, I loved to learn that way, where you had a manual, you had all these different individual practices that taught you life skills that you could apply in different kinds of situations. And of course, the motto of Scouts was to be prepared. Well, be prepared for what? Be prepared for anything that life was going to throw at you. And when I read Swami Rama's books, I felt like I had met a scoutmaster of yoga. And there was no real need for us to meet him. It was just a question of reading, assimilating, doing the practice, and see how we felt. And we did that for about 13 years on our own.
But then that switched.
Yes, it did. We before it switched for good. We also became very active in a study group at the local Hindu temple, where we studied the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. We were the only white Caucasians in the group, but the group became our spiritual family, and we grew very, very close. And the priest's wife every Saturday after our study would make us idlis and sambar, and because they were from South India, and it was just a lovely, lovely experience. As our practice deepened, we recognized that many relationships that previously existed no longer existed. As part of our practice, we began to prune away different relationships, personal relationships, business relationships, and we honestly felt that these were the right decisions. We had really no second guesses about the decisions that we had made. However, because our sadhana and our sangha, our satsang, was basically just the two of us, at a certain point we felt like we were out on a limb. And we just needed to touch base with somebody who had been on this path before to ask a question such as, how are we doing? Is this normal? And Swami Rama at that time was our primary teacher through his books. So I wrote a little autobiographical sketch of ourselves and sent him a letter. And I received a phone call from his ashram at the time, which was in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, the Himalayan Institute. And I spoke to his secretary. She said that Swami Rama received your letter, and he wants you to come at your earliest convenience to be initiated into this lineage. Well, I had known about this tradition of being initiated. I didn't fully understand it, but I was honored by the invitation. And of course, we accepted. And we went down to Honesdale, and we were seated in a living room setting. Swami Rama was seated in a chair, a generous chair, and his eyes were closed. So we assumed that he was just meditating. So that was no problem. We had our own mantra, we had our own practice. So we just sat and in that quiet setting. And then all of a sudden, we heard this voice, so we opened our eyes and engaged. And he looked at me. He said, "Are you a teacher?" I said, "No, I'm an art dealer." And he said, "Well, you are a teacher, and many people will come to you, and I will help you." Well, of course, at that time, what do you make of something like that? You really can't see as much as he could see. So we just sort of filed it until our lives caught up with that understanding.
And it sounds like if we fast forward a little bit, well, I guess actually you took him around an exhibition, and that was kind of interesting, telling as well.
Yes, that was very interesting. We invited Swami Rama to come to Saratoga to visit, and Saratoga, it's sort of like a Hollywood production. You have all sorts of characters. It's like a Damon Runyon production. So you have owners, you have trainers, you have very wealthy people who come, and lots of gamblers, and you have lots of just regular people who are just gawking and want to be seen and noted with all these folks. And we rented the ballroom of the largest hotel in town for an art gallery. And Swami Rama came in his traditional burgundy robes that he wore from his time teaching in Buddhist monasteries. And it was as if it was like Moses parting the sea, the Red Sea. People would just stand aside as he walked through the lobby, coming into the ballroom and where the exhibition was. And we greeted him. We were very honored. It was thrilling. And we took him all around the entire perimeter of the show. And Janice would tell a little story about each of the paintings or pastel drawings that she had done. And we came all the way around, and we were waiting for him to tell us something about what he experienced, and possibly extolling the virtues of the artwork. And we stood waiting for him to say something, and finally he opened his mouth, and out came the words, "This should not be here." And what do you make of that? This should not be here. Is he saying that we could have found a better location for the exhibition? So our minds were really swirling around what to do, and the only thing that I could think of to say was, "Why don't we go for lunch?"
Good answer.
Of course, later on, we realized that he was commenting on the fact that we were putting all this energy into earning a living for ourselves, and yet there were other callings that were waiting for us. And so it was a time to redirect our energy. And part of that pruning away of relationships was a way of disengaging from the relationship that we had in Saratoga.
How did you found the AMI from there?
Well, the AMI was something that was growing that we didn't realize was happening. But in 1995, we were sued by the New York Racing Association. The New York Racing Association is a nonprofit organization that administers parimutuel wagering for the state of New York. And we were sued as part of their intellectual property business. they trademarked the word Saratoga, and they claimed that they owned any image of horse racing. So basically, somebody, representative from the New York Racing Association, knocked on our door one day and said, we're your new partner, and we want 15% of every dollar that you bring in.
This sounds like someone with a baseball bat.
That's right. That's right. Either that or a gun. So we sought legal counsel. Legal counsel advised us that they had no authority to do that they had no legal justification for it, that in deciding intellectual property, somebody who owns a copyright either has to intimidate a prospective competitor or will have to sue them. Well, they tried to shake us down, and because the law was on our side, we felt obligated to defend the artist's constitutional right of free expression. We felt that this dharmically was coming to us. And so they sued us. And we spent a whole year fighting and paying for this lawsuit to defend the artist's constitutional right for free expression. And finally, we won. And within a couple of days, we received a letter from Swami Rama, who at that point had moved back to India. And so the letter must have been mailed a good 10 days to 2 weeks prior. But it arrived a day or two after we received the notice from the court that we had won. And it was a very short note, and all it said was, "Start teaching now." Well, I have to say that I have a very shy personality. I'm not really led by a very outwardly directed ego. I use the ego when I need to. When I'm driving an automobile, I use an ego. When I'm having this interview right now, I'm using an ego. It's in service to a higher wisdom. But I never thought of myself as someone who would be teaching this sacred work in the world. But I didn't make that decision. My master instructed me to do it. So I knew that I had an obligation, even though I had reservations and I had worries and concerns about it. So what do I teach? And the only thing that I felt qualified to teach was what I practiced. And so I had just bought a computer. It was very early days of computers. And I sat down at my desk, and for 2 weeks, I just poured out on the hard drive what we practiced every day, morning, afternoon, evening, all the various different practices. And that became handouts for a class that I developed, a 6-week course that taught people questions like, who am I, from where have I come, why am I here, what's to be done, where will I go after the body dies, a systematic procedure for meditation, diaphragmatic breathing, optimization and coordination of the functions of the mind, Ayurvedic medical principles, easy gentle yoga, contemplation, repentance, and prayer. And these were handouts that I would give that became the curriculum for the course. And ultimately, it became the skeletal outline for the book. Yeah. So, I started teaching, and as I did, I learned more from the students, because every question that the student asked, I had to answer for myself. Yeah. And so the depth of my understanding grew greater and greater, and I wanted to share this with other people, because we were not some Indian Swami who came from Delhi or came from Rishikesh to come to the United States to plant seeds. We were Americans. We had a completely different background than Swami Rama or any of these masters that came over. And certainly the reason that they came was to plant the seeds in our consciousness and to see how, as Americans, we would take this knowledge and interpret our own American culture based on it. And so that's what I tried to do through the book. And Janice was intimately involved because she's my editor. And what a great blessing to have an editor who is intimately familiar with the material. I can't even imagine hiring an editor who might be very competent as an editor, but not being familiar with the esoteric knowledge of this material. They would never be able to give it the justice that it is due.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
From there, I want to go into some of the knowledge, but before I do that, there's one brief story, 1993, the world's whitest horse and a lesson in faith.
Yeah, that was very interesting. In 1993, almost into 94, we found out that Swami Rama was dying. He had cancer. He had moved back completely to India, and was living at the hospital that in Dehradun, north of Rishikesh, that he had created himself. And it was a nursing school and a medical college. It was a medical city in the midst. It was sort of like discovering Disneyland in the middle of the prairie somewhere in the early 1800s. And Swami Rama sent an invitation for us to come to India, and it was to be his last teaching, his last public teaching. And there was going to be a 2-week time studying with him, and then a 2-week trip into the high Himalayas, where you would ride on these little donkeys through these very small little paths that dropped off, into hundreds of feet into eternity. And we had no desire originally to go to India. But this was an opportunity. It was an opportunity for some closure, to say thank you to this man who taught us so much, and to wish him a bon voyage. And so we were wrestling: should we go? Should we not go? Should we go? Should we not go? And it was expensive. It was not insignificant at the time. It was somewhere around $5,000, and we had savings, not much, but we would have to take money out of savings. And finally, the day came when we had to make a decision. We had to make a reservation. We had to send a down payment. And after all the deliberation, we both woke up that morning and we both were certain that we had to go. Mm-hmm. I wrote the check. We dropped it in the mailbox, and we stayed in silence most of the day, because let's face it, the ego and the unconscious mind were actively engaged in guerrilla warfare. Hey, you made a mistake. You never should have done that. That was the wrong decision. And so, we honored and we witnessed and we sacrificed all of this guerrilla warfare that was being thrown at us. Mm-hmm. And after lunch, it was in the afternoon, I got a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Don Disney. Now, we had some relationships. We had a business relationship in the past with Don Disney. He was a horse owner from Florida. And we also knew him because he had a horse that won a very famous race in Saratoga. The horse's name was Runaway Groom. So we were familiar with the horse. We were familiar with Don Disney. And I'm talking to him with my hat on as the art dealer, And Don Disney is saying to me that he would like to commission a painting. Mm-hmm. Parenthetically, let me just step back, because the study that we were going to go to India for was to study the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Shvetashvatara in Sanskrit means the whitest horse. And in Indian lore, the whitest horse always refers to a sage who has purified his or her own instrument, his or her own mind, into a point of whiteness and purity. And so this was the Shvetashvatara, the whitest horse Upanishad, about the sage who has become enlightened and has let go of all of their attachments and obstacles that were stored in the unconscious mind. So I'm talking to Don Disney, and he's telling me about this commission. He's letting me know where it was stable. We had to go to Lexington, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. He gave me the name of the farm manager, and we did all the business items that an art dealer and a client would go through. And I said to him, would you like to speak to Janice? He said, oh, that's not really necessary, because I've done business with her before. I don't want to bother her. She's probably in the studio. But I would like to send her a message. And as I'm telling you this story, Michael, the hairs are already starting to raise up on my arm.
Mine as well.
He says, I would like to have you tell Janice for me that I've been in the horse business for maybe 20 years or so, and this runaway groom is the whitest horse I have ever seen in my entire life. And the amount of the commission to the dollar was the exact amount of the check that we had written out in the morning to go to India. So this whitest horse of thoroughbred racing was going to pay for our journey to India to study the whitest horse Upanishad.
Ooga booga.
Right. So it's just fantastic. So it just gives you shraddha, it gives you faith, mm-hmm. Born of personal experience.
Woohoo!
Exactly.
So let's go from there. Thank you so much for sharing. Let's talk about a few key highlights from your book. And I'll say again, I said it before I went on air, that we've had a lot of authors on the show, and a lot of them have great teachings to give, but often can't go exceptionally deep. And your book went really, really deep. So we're just even going to scratch the surface today. But I was very impressed at the level and depth of understanding in your work.
Well, it's not me. I guess to a certain extent, it's the way this mind works. I love the teaching. First and foremost, I love the teaching. And if I have a talent, the talent is that I connect dots. For some reason, I have a talent to connect dots. And I've always loved to share something that I have learned mm-hmm. that has been helpful to me. I love to share it with other people. Hey, I've experienced this. What do you think of this? And so that's I think the greatest contribution, because there are a lot of people who know a lot more about the esoterica involved, but I have an allergic reaction to the esoterica unless it has a practical application in my life. And that I guess goes back to my affinity for scouts. It has to be practical, be prepared. Mm-hmm. And all of life is relationship. And every relationship means that I have to take an action, whether it's mental, verbal, or physical. And every action I take is going to bring about a consequence. Well, I already know the consequence that I want to experience. I want to be happy. I want to be healthy. I want to be secure. I want loving, nurturing, creative relationships. And what I was able to see in yoga science was a philosophy of life that would lead me from point A to point B.
Let's go from there then. What would you say is this philosophy? Not that you can encompass it in a few sentences, but what's the guiding principle behind it?
The guiding principle is just the definition of yoga, a union, okay, on so many different levels, okay, so many levels, every level. But I like to think of yoga as a metaphoric bridge that connects in every relationship that I have my outer action with my inner wisdom. And my personal experience is the more that I can base my thoughts, my words, and my physical actions on my own inner intuitive wisdom, the better I have felt physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And the opposite is true. The less that my thoughts, words, and actions reflect my inner wisdom, and in fact, when my actions conflict with my inner wisdom, that inner conflict has generated outer conflict and pain.
How do you start to move past, to actually clear away, I don't even know if we call it cobwebs, I'll call it the pyrotechnics that are inside of our mind, to be able to hear and get to that inner wisdom, because that's often not, until we cultivate it, the first reaction.
That is the genius of yoga science. The genius of yoga science places one concept above all, and that is ahimsa, non-injury, non-harming. Do no injury. Above all else, no injury. And the reason for that is very simple, and that is that on the highest level of consciousness, we are all part of the supreme reality. We are all one. The limitation of my brain and my senses sees two. I see you, I see my own body, but the body, the mind, the personality, the habit patterns, they're all subject to change, death, decay, and decomposition. So they're only a relative truth of who I am. But in yoga science, we're not looking for relative truth. We already have the relative truth, and we're still stressed out. We're still in pain. So the idea is to go beyond the relative to something that is real, that is everlasting, that is eternal. And that's what yoga provides us to do, is to work with relationships. But because ahimsa is the highest principle, we don't start off with issues that are tremendously emotionally charged. We start off with things that are so easy, it's like a no-brainer. So if I eat dinner, the question becomes, am I going to brush my teeth? Right? If it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm watching television and a coffee commercial comes on, and my ego and my senses and my unconscious mind want to go into the kitchen for a cup of coffee, maybe two sugars and a little heavy cream, or even half and half, should I do that or should I not do it? What does my inner wisdom say? And so that introduces us to the major function of the mind called buddhi, which is our conscience. It acts as a mirror. Our conscience, the buddhi, acts as a mirror in that it can reflect wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind. Now, the superconscious portion of the mind, I never heard of the superconscious portion of the mind growing up or going to college or law school. But it turns out that there is such a portion of the mind. It's beyond the conscious. It's beyond the unconscious, but it's in the subtle world, so it's really outside of our day-to-day matrix. But the conscience can reflect that wisdom and bring it into the matrix. It can bring it into our conscious mind. So I just ask people, when your conscience advises you, do you need a PhD degree to know that it's true? No. Do you need a college degree to know that it's true? No. Do you even need a high school degree? No. What you need is the willpower to serve it in mind, action, and speech. So if you want to be happy, you want to be healthy, you want to be secure, you want loving, nurturing relationships, start with what's easy. Okay? So brushing my teeth after dinner is something that's doable.
Mm-hmm.
Sacrificing a cup of coffee at 10 o'clock at night is doable. And by letting that go, the contractive power of the desire that conflicts with my inner wisdom can be transformed. It's all about transforming my own creative energy. So, selfish desires, fear, anger, that inhibits us and creates obstacles to our path to happiness and health and security. These forces of fear, anger, and selfish desires, they are our creative energy in forms that are debilitating and contractive. And if we give them attention, if we think about them, if we speak about them, if we act on them, we are going to be in pain. If we repress them, we're going to become neurotic and we'll be in even more pain. But if we can sacrifice them so that our outer action is in harmony with our inner wisdom, the contractive, debilitating power of my mental fear and anger and self-will desire stored in my unconscious mind can be transformed into strategic reserves of positive healing energy, willpower, and creativity.
What is it? Thank you so much. I want to dive into this deeper. You talk about potential versus kinetic energy. What does it mean to sacrifice this or even to transform this?
Well, we know energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. But we do know from 5th grade science class that it can be transformed. Mm-hmm. We can transform ice into water, and we can transform water into gas. Mm-hmm. So my fear and my anger and my selfish desire is just what? It's my creative energy in an improper form. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if I gave you 20 gallons of crude oil from Saudi Arabia and put it into your automobile, you'd be very upset.
Dead automobile.
Dead automobile. It would wreck your engine, cost you $5,000 or $10,000 to have it fixed. But if I took that crude oil and I sent it to a refinery in Texas and had them refine it into gasoline, they have that technology, and then put it into your automobile, you'd be very pleased. So fear and anger and greed is not bad. It's not good. It's just my energy. And I need it. So right now, if I act on that fear, anger, or selfish desire in opposition to my inner wisdom, if I act on it kinetically, that action is going to bring about a consequence that's going to result in pain. Yep. If, however, I sacrifice it so that my outer actions reflect my inner wisdom, then it's going to be transformed. And it's going to be deposited in my unconscious mind, in the potential state. And I can draw upon that potential of energy, willpower, and creativity when I have an interview. Mm-hmm. You see, when I have a conversation with Michael.
This is fascinating in that if I'm hearing this right, and we talk about yoga, bridge, and union, you are making a bridge, a connection, a transformation between the anger, anxiety, and fear creative process and what you want to transform it and how you want to bring it out.
Not exactly. It is, but I just want to make one small adjustment, and that is, it's not about wanting. Mm-hmm. It's about service.
Yes.
It's about service. So there's really the desire is sort of set aside, or it too is transformed. The concept of desire is transformed into one of just service. So the truth is, for every human being, we are citizens of two worlds simultaneously. We are a citizen of the material world. We got that. We have a body, we have a mind, we have senses, right? We were born, we're going to die. Mm-hmm. But we're also a citizen of a transcendent world of spirit. I am pure consciousness, eternal consciousness, wisdom, and bliss, fullness, having a human experience in time and space, in duality, through a mind-body-sense complex. The key to successful living is to create a bridge that will connect these two worlds. And we connect the two worlds through that bridge by accessing the superconscious portion of the mind, which is an intuitive library of wisdom, which is contained in what religionists would refer to as the soul. Mm-hmm. My soul, which is a droplet of the ocean of G-O-D. Mm-hmm. And the more that I can counsel within, and then take that inner counsel and employ it in the world through my thoughts, my words, and my actions, the promise is I'll be able to fulfill the purpose of my life without pain, without misery, and without bondage.
Thank you. How much can meditation help us to connect to this, I guess, supreme reality within?
Well, that depends on desire. We are, the Upanishads, the ancient Indian scripture says, we are our deepest driving desire. Mm-hmm. As our deepest driving desire is, so is our will. As our will is, so is our deed. As our deed is, so becomes our destiny. So how happy do you want to be? How healthy do you want to be? How secure do you want to be? And what's the price that you're willing to pay? Jesus says this is a pearl of great price. Mm-hmm. It's going to take your giving up habits that are causing you pain. But many people identify with the pain. I had a brother-in-law who had lower back pain. Mm-hmm. And I had lower back pain. I, to be very honest with you, I held the majority of my fear as a young person in my lower back. Okay? Everybody holds emotion in different areas of the body. Mine was in my lower back. So my brother-in-law at the time, he had a lower back situation. It was not operable. Yep. Mine was not operable. But through my meditation practice and easy gentle yoga, I was able to resolve it and ameliorate it. So I said to him, would you like me to teach you some of these practices? And he responded in a way which was sarcastic. It was funny, but it's the kind of humor that has a tear rolling down your cheek. I said, would you like me to teach this to you? He said, if I didn't have the pain in my back, how would I know who I was? So it's sad, very sad. And of course, he did not take the teaching. And, that's okay. Everybody has to make a choice. But I say, how happy do you want to be? How healthy do you want to be? How secure do you want to be? What are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up the pain in your back? Are you willing to give up the fear that's really not working for you? Are you willing to give up the anger and the judgment that's only poisoning your physiology with all these hormones? Are you willing to give up selfish desires that conflict with your own inner wisdom? If you can do that, even just easy things, if you do easy things like brushing your teeth after dinner and sacrificing the cup of coffee at 10 o'clock at night, and having a cup of coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning if that's your pleasure, you see, then you can change your perspective. And if you change your perspective, you'll change your experience.
Thank you. There's a key word in here, and maybe we'll go to your formula, in fact, in a moment, but there's a key word, the W word, that's come up several times here. I think it's incredibly important. When I coach somebody, I always say, you can lead a horse to water, but